Welcome to Rad Flicks 1990. My name is Joe. These are just opinions. I am Joepinionated. What is a rad flick? A rad flick is a movie that has stood the test of time. Next category, Action Sci-Fi Adventure. Finalists for Action Sci-Fi Adventure for 1990. First up, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sharon Stone. It's Total Recall. Directed by Paul Verhoeven. It's a movie about the future where memories can be implanted or erased. Douglas Quaid visits Recall, a company that offers virtual vacation memories. What a trip. What a crazy movie. I especially remember him walking through that x-ray machine. Whoa. It worked really well at the time. Up next again, this one's already been mentioned. Tremors, starring Fred Ward and Kevin Bacon. There's 6 degrees for you. Finalists for Raddest Action Sci-Fi Adventure 1990. Hell yeah. Directed by Rennie Harlan. Next up is Die Hard 2. I believe it's called Die Harder. I love Die Hard. And I love Die Hard 2. And I love Die Hard 3. When I was a kid, I liked this one more than Die Hard 1. I think that Die Hard 1 ages a little bit better. One of my very favorite action sequels is Die Hard 2. Next up, directed by Warren Beatty, starring Madonna and Warren Beatty, Al Pacino. It's Dick Tracy again. Next up again, Flatliners, 1990. It's a finalist. Action Sci-Fi Adventure, Flatliners, directed by Joel Schumacher. Julia Roberts, again, incredible in this movie. Kiefer Sutherland, what a name, Donald. What were you thinking? Kiefer. Next up, Action Sci-Fi Adventure finalist, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, directed by Steve Barron. Rad Flicks. Show it to your kids. And the last finalist for 1990, Rad Flicks Action Adventure Sci-Fi is Hard to Kill, starring Steven Seagal and Kelly LeBrock, directed by Bruce Malmuth. Mason Storm, a Los Angeles detective, is left for dead after witnessing a murder involving corrupt politicians. Years later, he awakens from his coma and embarks on a mission of vengeance against those who tried to kill him. Certified rad, hard to kill. And the winner for Raddest Action Sci-Fi Adventure of 1990 goes to Total Recall, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is a huge deal. Total Recall was a big deal. Rad flick. These are the kind of movies we want to certify rad. Runner-up was a tie between the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Tremors, which I absolutely love. Tremors is one of those ones that come on TV all the time. Wouldn't miss it. That one stayed on. That was a great movie. Elephant Gun and Total Recall. And there's a lot of things I think of.
Well, 3 in particular. 3 things that I think of.
Next up, Raddest Action Sci-Fi Adventure. We have 5 finalists. First up, directed by Catherine Bigelow. The movie is Point Break, starring Lori Petty, Gary Busey, Patrick Swayze, and Keanu Reeves. This movie was a big deal. Point Break. These guys are robbing banks. There's undercover cops. There's surfing. There's fighting. There's everything that you get in your average Patrick Swayze movie and Keanu Reeves. I was a kid when this came out. This is really like a breakout for Keanu Reeves for me. Next up, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, directed by James Cameron, starring Linda Hamilton, Edward Furlong, Robert Patrick, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Terminator 2 Judgment Day, directed by James Cameron, is one of the raddest movies ever. If we're doing a raddest flicks of all time, Terminator 2 is in the conversation. Get down. Come with me if you want to live. The Guns N' Roses, I think of Guns N' Roses. I've got toys in the room. Terminator 2, action-packed, sci-fi, adventure, perfect. Hasn't aged a second. Well, maybe Judgment Day being on in 1997. But other than that, this goes out to my boy Randy. Terminator 2 Judgment Day finalist. Next up, starring Damon Wayans and Bruce Willis, the movie is Last Boy Scout, directed by Tony Scott. Tony Scott was kind of famous, especially around this time, making awesome action adventure movies.
Jimmy Dix was a man thrown out of football. They were trying to clean up their acts, and they got into the dirty world.
Anyways, Bruce Willis, Damon Wayans, both super cool. Talked about Living Color earlier, starring Damon Wayans. We would rent this movie because we all love Die Hard and Damon Wayans. Next, Action Sci-Fi Adventure 1991 goes to Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, starring Alan Rickman as the sheriff of Nottingham, Mary Elizabeth, Morgan Freeman, and Kevin Costner. Robin and Locksley, directed by Kevin Reynolds. Second favorite Robin Hood of all time. My favorite being the Disney animated version. Rob from the rich and give to the poor. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Next finalist, for raddest action adventure sci-fi in 1991, directed by Steven Spielberg, starring Dustin Hoffman, Julia Roberts, Bob Hoskins, and the late great Robin Williams. Hook. Special movie to me. Family favorite. Love Robin Williams. Love this movie. Love Hook. The final finalist is Hook. And the winner of raddest action sci-fi adventure of 1991 goes to Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Maybe the raddest sci-fi action movie of all time. Love the soundtrack. Linda Hamilton. Runner-ups for raddest action sci-fi adventure 1991 go to Point Break. Keanu Reeves, Patrick Swayze. And third raddest goes to Last Boy Scout, starring Bruce Willis and Damon Wayans. All right, finalists for raddest action sci-fi adventure in 1992 are Alien 3, directed by David Fincher. Ah, that's cool. I didn't realize that. Starring Sigourney Weaver as Ellen Ripley. I think this is the first Aliens that I actually watched was Aliens 3. They get David Fincher, James Cameron, and Ridley Scott for the first three movies. Up next, Steven Seagal's next big movie is Under Siege, co-starring Tommy Lee Jones, directed by Andrew Davis. Die Hard on a Ship. Remember, that's what people were calling it. Tommy Lee Jones plays the bad guy. Steven Seagal plays a cook, like some elite guy, but he's also a chef, so he's really good with knives. Next finalist, raddest action sci-fi adventure 1992 goes to Patriot Games. Now, this is one of in the Jack Ryan series of books, directed by Philip Noyce, starring Ann Archer and Harrison Ford. I wouldn't be surprised if you see it. So this is like my movie collection when I was probably 19 or 20. Next finalist for action sci-fi adventure 1992 goes to Universal Soldier, starring Dolph Lundgren and Jean-Claude Van Damme, directed by Roland Emmerich. Basically, these two guys are resurrected from the dead, and then they remember who they were and who wronged them in their previous lives. Next up, this one came up in my Tim Burton countdown.
Batman franchise with Batman Returns.
Batman Returns. But Danny DeVito, Michelle Pfeiffer, co-star with Michael Keaton in this one. Penguin and Catwoman, certified rad finalist, action sci-fi adventure. Next one up is right in the very bottom. It's pink. Next up, Reservoir Dogs, directed by Quentin Tarantino. Finishes in the raddest action sci-fi adventure movies of 1992. Okay. I think the number one thing to critique it would be that there's not enough action. Starring Harvey Keitel, Tim Roth, Michael Madsen, Chris Penn. It's a heist movie, but it's about post-heist meeting up and things didn't go the way they planned. Incredibly violent. Some would say incredibly slow. It's slow for some people. For me, it's one of the greatest movies ever made, Reservoir Dogs. Next up for action sci-fi adventure, Unforgiven. Once again, this is another movie that I don't really think of as an action sci-fi, maybe a bit of adventure. Directed by Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood, of course, cleaned up at the Oscars for this one. Co-starring Gene Hackman, Morgan Freeman. Next finalist goes to Army of Darkness, directed by Sam Raimi, starring Bruce Campbell. Third consecutive category. Final finalist for action sci-fi adventure goes to The Last of the Mohicans, directed by Michael Mann, starring Madeline Stowe and Daniel Day-Lewis. And the winner goes to Batman Returns, directed by Tim Burton, starring Danny DeVito, Michelle Pfeiffer, and what's his name? Batman Returns. Michael Keaton. Tim Burton around my house is celebrated, certified rad, regardless of what he does. And this is one of his better movies. Sadly, the last one directed by Tim Burton, but he produced Batman Forever. The runner-ups are Reservoir Dogs and Army of Darkness. A couple of those that didn't make it into action sci-fi adventure. Super Cop, starring Jackie Chan, Super Cop, and Trespass. That was the one with Ice-T, Bill Paxton. Up next, action sci-fi adventure. The finalists are Demolition Man, directed by Marco Brambilla, starring Sylvester Stallone, Wesley Snipes, Sandra Bullock, Dennis Leary. I love Demolition Man. It's about the future where everybody's really soft and all the bad people live in the sewers. I think there was like a big earthquake. You're not allowed to swear anymore. There's some sort of mystery on how to flush the toilet. I was a kid when this came out and it was awesome. Certified rad. I've watched it many times since. Simon Phoenix. Up next, directed by Steven Spielberg. So he made this movie back to back with Schindler's List, which is just crazy to me. The movie is Jurassic Park, starring Laura Dern and Sam Neill. This was a big deal. This movie was a huge blockbuster, like definition of blockbuster. Everybody wanted to see it. Every store you went to had cups for sale for Jurassic Park, McDonald's, all the different fast food things, everything. This movie was amazing. They put dinosaurs onto the screen. We know more about dinosaurs now than they did back in 1993, but yeah, there's no feathered dinosaurs, but it's still great. Up next, directed by Andrew Davis, starring Tommy Lee Jones and Harrison Ford. The movie is The Fugitive. Dr. Richard Kimball said his wife was killed by a one-armed man. Excellent action adventure movie, The Fugitive, based off an old TV show. Might have even been a radio series, but it was definitely a TV show a long time ago. Will he find the one-armed man that actually killed his wife? And Tommy Lee Jones is a big deal for this movie too. Or he got a lot of praise for this movie. Next up, directed by John McTiernan, starring Austin O'Brien, Arnold Schwarzenegger. The movie is Last Action Hero. I remember AC/DC having the song Big Gun on the soundtrack, and I remember thinking this movie was kind of lame when I was a kid, but it did gather a cult following. Next finalist, Action Sci-Fi Adventure 1993. We'll go with, I guess, a bit of an action movie here. Tombstone, directed by George P. Cosmatos, starring Val Kilmer, Kurt Russell, Sam Elliott, many more. The Gunfight at the OK Corral, Doc Hollywood, Wyatt Earp. Up next, directed by Tony Scott, starring Christian Slater, Patricia Arquette, Brad Pitt, Dennis Hopper, Christopher Walken, Chris Penn. Written by Quentin Tarantino. The movie is True Romance. True Romance is right here. Incredible movie. I love the soundtrack. I love the Christopher Walken, Dennis Hopper scene. Incredibly violent and incredibly Quentin Tarantino. I mean, it's got Quentin all over it. It's got a whole bunch of tricks, a whole bunch of movie references. I think he sold this to raise the money to make Reservoir Dogs, for how I remember it, but I could be totally wrong. Low on facts, high on opinions. Holy shit. Next finalist, Action Sci-Fi Adventure, goes to Fire in the Sky, based on the true story of Travis Walton getting abducted by aliens. Do not let your kids watch this. They will be horrified. Last finalist for Action Sci-Fi Adventure 1993 goes to Judgment Night, starring Emilio Estevez, Cuba Gooding Jr., Dennis Leary is in it, R.E. Gold from Entourage, can't remember, think of his name right now, Jeremy Piven is in it. Guys end up in the wrong hood in a really fancy motorhome, survive, get out of this bad area. I told you I got no cure for cancer right down here. Love Dennis Leary. It had Everlast from House of Pain was in it as well. Judgment Night, and a great soundtrack. Love the De La Soul with Teenage Fan Club, Fallen. Raddest action sci-fi adventure movie in 1993 goes to Jurassic Park. Pretty high votes across the board, with the runner-up going to The Fugitive, starring Harrison Ford. Those are two just elite action adventure movies. Right, next up for Rad Flicks, we have action sci-fi adventure. Finalists are True Lies. True Lies, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tom Arnold, Jamie Lee Curtis. Whoa, whoa, wee, wah. Directed by James Cameron. Incredible action movie, start to finish. Next up, Tragic Story was when the movie The Crow was released, starring Brandon Lee, who tragically passed away on said accident during the making of the movie The Crow. I remember watching this one quite a bit. Ernie Hudson, co-starring Ernie Hudson. Eric Draven was the name of the character, returns from the dead to avenge his and his fiance's murders. Next finalist goes to Speed. In 1994, almost everybody got it for Christmas. And I remember watching Speed after getting back from Dumb and Dumber at the theater. Later on that evening, we watched Speed on VHS at home. Speed starring Sandra Bullock, Keanu Reeves, and Dennis Hopper. Jan de Bont directed this action, gripping suspense. There's a bomb on a bus. The bus can't drop below 50 miles an hour. Next up for action, adventure, sci-fi, Pulp Fiction from 1994. Quentin Tarantino directed action sci-fi. There's a bit of action. There's no sci-fi. Adventure, I don't know. There's lots of blood for sure. This one will come up in other categories, I'm positive. One of the greatest soundtracks of all time, starring John Travolta, Uma Thurman, Samuel L. Jackson, Bruce Willis, Harvey Keitel, Quentin Tarantino, Ving Rhames. Next for action sci-fi adventure nominee, Interview with a Vampire from Neil Jordan, starring Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, based on the Anne Rice novel Interview with the Vampire / Axel. They did Interview with the Vampire soundtrack. They did Sympathy for the Devil. They covered Rolling Stones. Next up, Natural Born Killers from Oliver Stone. Quentin Tarantino originally wrote. You can see Natural Born Killers over top of me. This is when I was about 20, I think. This is my movie collection, Natural Born Killers. That was honestly one of my favorite Oliver Stone movies, and that's not very popular. Woody Harrelson, Juliette Lewis, Mickey and Mallory. Next finalist, right here, Stargate, directed by Roland Emmerich, Kurt Russell, and and James Spader, the scientists, find a portal to another constellation and go through the wormhole to this other place where there's people living around pyramids. Excellent science fiction movie, Stargate. Just love this movie. And the winner for Raddest Action Sci-Fi Adventure of 1994 goes to Pop Quiz Airport. Gunman with One Hostage. It goes to Speed. Pop Quiz. Jeff Daniels, Dennis Hopper, Keanu Reeves, Sandra Bullock. The link in the description to all the trailers mentioned in this episode, my Discord, Patreon, runner-up Stargate, and Pulp Fiction. Next category for Rad Flicks, Action Sci-Fi Adventure. And the finalists are, first up, directed by John McTiernan, starring Jeremy Irons, Samuel L. Jackson, and Bruce Willis. The movie is Die Hard with a Vengeance. Die Hard 3 with a Vengeance. This one, John McClane teams up with Samuel L. Jackson, running around New York City. Jeremy Irons is Alan Rickman's brother. Hans Gruber. Die Hard 1, I think, aged the best. Die Hard 2 and 3 are really good.
When I was in New York, I went to see a comedian and he was in this movie and got to know him. So I actually did watch this movie recently. I love Die Hard movies. They're so good. And I'm with Ian. Die Hard is a Christmas movie.
Except for this one. This is not the only one
It's
that's
not a Christmas
not
movie.
a Christmas movie. Die Hard 1 and 2, Die Harder, take place over the Christmas vacation. This is the first one to take place. I think it's in the summertime. Hot Time Summer in the City was the opening track on this movie. Next up for finalists, directed by Kevin Reynolds, starring Jeanne Tripplehorn and Kevin Costner. The movie is Waterworld, a huge budget, and Dennis Hopper was in this movie. I remember really actually quite liking this movie, thinking it was really cool. It's about this loner, this mutant who develops gills and is evolving with the world around him. There's all sorts of rumors about dry land and people selling souvenirs and from the human world. Mad Max, post-apocalyptic stuff.
I really liked it. Saw it in the theater.
Up next, directed by Catherine Bigelow, starring Angela Bassett and Ralph Fiennes. This movie is Strange Days. Do you remember this one?
I don't remember this movie. What's it about?
Dystopian future on New Year's Eve. Former cop turned street hustler, Ralph Fiennes, becomes embroiled in a dangerous conspiracy involving virtual reality technology and a murder he witnessed. I don't really remember it. Next finalist, produced by Tim Burton, but this time he gives up the director's reins. I think it was because Batman Returns wasn't as big a commercial success as Batman. The movie is Batman Forever, directed by Joel Schumacher, this time starring Val Kilmer, Tommy Lee Jones, and Jim Carrey. The debut of Robin, who's Chris O'Donnell.
I loved this movie. First of all, Val Kilmer in anything. Val Kilmer is a great actor. Tommy Lee Jones, Jim Carrey. It was pretty vivid, good costumes. I love the Batman movies back then.
I remember really not liking this when I was a kid. I liked Jim Carrey, and I did mention Jim Carrey's performance in this in my Jim Carrey list on this channel. Number 10 all time Jim Carrey performances. I'm going with 1995's Batman Forever and his role as the Riddler. For me, the Riddler is a great character. And probably the best thing about Batman Forever. Check out the channel. It's at My Friend Joe on YouTube. Hashtag Joepinionated is a good way to find me. Tommy Lee Jones as Two-Face was awful. Jim Carrey was good. Val Kilmer was okay. He really wasn't in it that much. I watched that Val Kilmer documentary and really excited to be Batman, but then felt like he couldn't really spread his wings. I maybe need to watch it again because I don't think I've watched this since the 90s. I remember the car climbing the wall, and I remember just being like, that's cheesy.
You're such a huge Tim Burton fan that you would have been like boycotting liking this movie because he didn't direct it. I think there's definitely a Tim Burton bias from Joe because Joe loves Tim Burton.
He produced this movie, number one, so he's still involved. I don't know if at the time I had developed a Tim Burton bias. Like, I don't know for sure that I really knew who Tim Burton was at this point. I must have known right around this time. I don't think I had pieced together that he had done Pewie's and Edward Scissorhands and all those ones. So,
I mean, we would have watched anything with Jim Carrey in it and just been eating it up.
Yeah, that's true. I definitely watched it. I don't know if I watched it in the theater, but I definitely watched this one. Next finalist for Raddest Action Sci-Fi Adventure, directed by Robert Rodriguez, starring Selma Hayek and Antonio Banderas in Desperado.
At the time, it was like Antonio Banderas, but Selma Hayek. I freaking love Selma Hayek personally. Like every time I see her in an interview, I always got to watch it. I love her. She's so funny.
You know, Robert Rodriguez style obviously marries well with Tarantino. I mean, they worked together quite a bit in the future. This movie is, very Dusk Till Dawn style, a lot of crazy action going on. It's almost like a comic book brought to life. Very stylish, very cool show. Next up for finalists, Raddest Action Sci-Fi Adventures, directed by Ian Softly. The movie is Hackers, starring Johnny Lee Miller and Angelina Jolie.
Johnny Lee Miller was Angelina Jolie's first husband. Her mom was Marceline Bertrand.
Next up, directed by Michael Mann, starring Robert De Niro, Val Kilmer, and Al Pacino. The movie is Heat, cult classic. Similar to, say, Scarface from De Palma, like this thing is just super popular. I had the pleasure of going to the bar in Greenwich Village where they filmed the scene between De Niro and Pacino. Really cool spot. Look into it if you're in Manhattan.
Like I said before, I love Val Kilmer. And I mean, who doesn't love Pacino and De Niro? It's kind of something wrong with you if you don't love them. Action packed.
Next up, directed by Barry Sonnenfeld, starring Gene Hackman, John Travolta. The movie is Get Shorty, Rene Russo. Do you remember the guy who wrote this?
Oh, it's Elmer Leonard. So Elmer Leonard wrote it.
I remember reading a couple of his books later. I think maybe he wrote Jackie Brown. He wrote something that Tarantino used. He wrote another movie that I really like anyways. Funny movie, start to finish, like entertaining start to finish. A loan shark from Miami travels to Hollywood, becomes embroiled in the movie business while trying to collect a debt, encountering eccentric movie makers and mobsters along the way. Next finalist goes to Mel Gibson, Sophie Marceau in Braveheart. I mean, there's definitely some action in this movie and some really incredible action in this movie.
You can take my life, but you can't take my freedom. David versus Goliath story. Funny, the other night, my son was saying to me, do you think that we watched Braveheart more than any other movie? I said, I think it was between Braveheart and Shawshank. Love the music in the movie and the scenery, the cinematography is amazing back home in Scotland, in the motherland.
Funny about this movie is that I remember when it came out in the theaters, somebody in my class had gone to see it. And he was like, oh man, you got to see Braveheart. That guy wasn't really that trustworthy. So-and-so thought that movie was good. Like, it probably fucking stinks. My parents rented it. We watched it on the TV downstairs. Blown away. I'd never seen anything like that before. It's an epic. It's like Spartacus. It's like one of these big epic tales. Gladiator basically tried to be this movie. I'm glad you mentioned the music. Beautiful, very Scottish. Final finalist, we made it all the way to 10 for Action Sci-Fi Adventure, directed by Michael Bay, starring Martin Lawrence and Will Smith. Bad Boys.
Bad Boys, Bad Boys. Well, that was a theme from Cops, but I think it was the theme of this movie too. Will Smith is in his prime back then before he slapped Chris Rock. What an idiot. Same with Mel Gibson. Like, come on, you guys. Stylized action movie, not a ton of substance.
It's a Michael Bay movie. Tia Leone was also in this one. And the winner for Raddest Action Sci-Fi Adventure goes to Heat, starring Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. Runner-up, Raddest Action Sci-Fi Adventure 1995 goes to Die Hard with a Vengeance. And third place goes to Batman Forever.
I agree. Heat was the best.
Shootouts in the street were incredible. It looked honestly like you're watching an actual shootout in the streets. And the next category for Rad Flicks 1996 is Raddest Action Sci-Fi Adventure. We have 6 finalists. The first one is directed by Brian De Palma, co-starring Jon Voight and Tom Cruise. The movie is Mission Impossible. Ethan Hunt, agent at the IMF. The special effects, him flying through the air, him riding on the train, him dropping into that vault.
Yeah, and the stunts on this movie are epic. Mission Impossible, it really, really set the bar high for adventure movies. It is a great movie. I think everybody saw this movie. It was probably one of the biggest earners of the year, I'm sure.
This next one, though, was also a big deal. Directed by Michael Bay, starring Nicolas Cage and Sean Connery. Show the man now, dog. The movie is The Rock. Another one I watched recently with Ed Harris. Terrorists that take over Alcatraz in San Francisco, and they have some sort of chemical weapons. Sean Connery is this dangerous guy that escaped from Alcatraz. Michael Bay, really clean, big blockbuster action movies, car chases, cool car chase through Dirty Harry style through the streets of San Francisco. I watched it once a few years ago and I didn't think it aged well. And I watched it again, like I said, recently, and I quite liked it again. The panel of normal Canadians has certified this one as rad. We've already talked about this one, directed by Robert Rodriguez, Harvey Keitel, George Clooney, Quentin Tarantino, From Dusk Till Dawn. So that finishes as a finalist, and that's Yeah, I see it more as an action sci-fi adventure. I mean, it's all three of those. Up next, directed by Rennie Harlan, starring Gina Davis and Samuel L. Jackson. The movie is The Long Kiss Goodnight. A suburban housewife struggling with amnesia discovers that she has a violent past and she's a skilled government assassin. I definitely watched it. I totally forgot about this movie. So props to the Normal People panel for putting this one in the finals. Next up, directed by Tim Burton, starring Pierce Brosnan and Jack Nicholson. The movie is Mars Attacks. So Mars Attacks got kind of beat up at the start when it first came out. It was sort of a critical success, but didn't really gather the cult following until years later. And now it's a cult classic. Mars Attacks. Jack Nicholson's awesome in it, and it's directed by Tim Burton. Every single movie that this guy's touched has been a finalist or, in the conversation for finalist raddest movies of those particular years. The final finalist for raddest action sci-fi adventure 1996 goes to Roland Emmerich's directed Independence Day, starring Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum. Randy Quaid, maybe the biggest blockbuster of the year. I mean, it was one of them for sure. This movie was huge. And it was all about special effects, and the previews were just like real teaser kind of previews and countdowns. You're going to go watch this movie strictly for special effects. And it was pretty cool. The plot was not great. It wasn't as good as it could have been because the special effects in this were like groundbreaking. It's certified rad. It's definitely a movie that we all watched and we all kind of appreciated it at the time.
I'd agree with you on that. Like, because the special effects were so groundbreaking, everyone saw it and were in awe of it, but it wasn't a movie you went to for a good plot and a good story. It was a movie you went to watch the excitement of them figuring out how to make this stuff look real. So that's why you went to see Independence Day, and everybody saw it. It was Bill Pullman that played the president in Independence Day. I'll watch anything with Jeff Goldblum in it. Handsome dude.
The raddest action sci-fi adventure of 1996 goes to The Rock, and that's Michael Bay again. Funny thing is that it's the first time a movie has won without a single first place vote. Second place votes across the board for raddest action sci-fi adventure of 1996. Runner-up going to From Dusk Till Dawn. Next category is action sci-fi adventure raddest for 1997. First up, directed by my man, and there's an episode on his channel, directed by Robert Zemeckis. The movie is Contact.
1997, Robert Zemeckis produced and directed this movie. The movie is Contact. I saw this one in the theaters.
Starring Matthew McConaughey and Jodie Foster. Once again, Zemeckis does things where with special effects and makes them believable. It still looks good to this day. This movie, an excellent movie in the theater. I would love to watch this in the theater now and just crank it up. Even just the pulsing noise, the signal that these aliens are sending sounds amazing. I fell hard for this one. Surprising ending, but I think it's a good ending. It's got some closure. I'm a big fan of this movie, and I'm a really big fan of Robert Zemeckis. So one of his movies right behind me here, Back to the Future. Up next, this one's been mentioned already, Starship Troopers. This definitely fits more into the action sci-fi, in my opinion, even though it is pretty funny. So comedy's fitting. Paul Verhoeven directed Starship Troopers. Really cool special effects. Directed by Luc Besson, starring Mila Jovovich and Bruce Willis in The Fifth Element. It's an action-packed sci-fi adventure. Follows this cab driver named Corbin, and he kind of gets involved in this quest to save the universe. And he's got to retrieve these stones and stop the bad guys. Up next, directed by John Woo, starring John Travolta and Nicolas Cage. The movie is Face Off. It's a movie where this FBI agent undergoes a treatment to basically put this bad guy's face on his face. Castor Troy, John Woo, classic. Some people think this is a bad movie. A lot of people hate Nicolas Cage movies, or they got a problem with Nicolas Cage. Shouldn't say hate. Why? It's good fun. John Woo, great stuff. Definitely one of the raddest action movies of 1997 is Face Off. Up next, this David Fincher movie's already been mentioned. The movie is The Game. And it's definitely action and adventure. Great movie. Michael Douglas, this is one of his greatest roles. The Game, directed by Hayao Miyazaki from Studio Ghibli. The movie is Princess Mononoke. The voices, Billy Bob Thornton's one of the voices in this one, dubbed in English. A young warrior named Ashitaka becomes embroiled in a struggle between the inhabitants of a remote village and the gods and spirits of the forest. Mind-blowing Studio Ghibli movies, every single one of them. They're just on heavy rotation around our house. Netflix has them all. I highly, highly, highly recommend them. I want, if you're going to stop and watch any movie from these lists, watch a Studio Ghibli movie, watch Princess Mononoke. Every single thing is a creation from Hayao Miyazaki's genius brain. And last finalist for Action Sci-Fi Adventure goes to Men in Black, starring Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith, directed by Barry Sonnenfeld. It's about these guys that are in charge of monitoring aliens on Earth. Men in Black, more like a kids movie. It's definitely a science fiction, and the winner for Raddest Action Sci-Fi Adventure of 1997, as voted on by the Normal People panel, goes to The Fifth Element, starring Bruce Willis. So I like these Rad Flicks. We get to honor Bruce Willis pretty much every episode. And in runner-up goes to Robert Zemeckis and Jodie Foster, Contact, for Raddest Action Sci-Fi Adventure of 1997. Next category, Action Sci-Fi Adventure, Raddest from 1998. The finalists are, first up, directed by Mr. Madonna, Jason Statham, and Guy Ritchie's Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels.
From gambling, they have to pay a mobster 500,000 pounds. This turns into this big old rigmarole. It's a fun movie.
That was actually my favorite Guy Ritchie movie, was Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. It was sort of like what happened after Quentin Tarantino got going. Now we're seeing this new generation of film. Lock, Stock is one of the first great, Trainspotting's another one, but Lock, Stock's one of the first great ones that came out after that kind of come from the same ilk. Next up, directed by John Frankenheimer, starring Jean Reno and Robert De Niro. The movie is Ronin.
Car chase film, kind of spy thriller type of movie.
My buddy, a few doors down, absolutely loved this movie and watched it all the goddamn time, as well as Heat. Next up, directed by Stephen Norringham, starring Wesley Snipes and Stephen Dorff. It's Blade. Next up, Brett Ratner's, starring Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker, in Rush Hour.
Buddy cop movie. It was kind of, Jackie Chan was a big deal at the time, and Chris Tucker is so funny. So it's a fun movie.
Jackie Chan was definitely a big deal at the time, and this is one of the first English movies that he did. He did Rumble in the Bronx, and he did a few after that. I love Jackie Chan, especially his 80s and early 90s films in Hong Kong, Super Cop, Drunken Master, A New Generation's 48 Hours. Next up, directed by Steven Spielberg, starring Tom Hanks, Matt Damon. The movie is Saving Private Ryan.
I don't think it's really an action movie. It's more of a sad drama.
There's definitely some crazy action, storming the beaches of Normandy and D-Day and all that sort of stuff. This is intense. Instant fan, obviously. When I saw it, I thought it was great. I know a lot of people watch this on Remembrance Day or Memorial Day in the States. Okay, next up, starring Sean Penn and Adrian Brody, directed by Terrence Malick. The movie is The Thin Red Line. Oh, I was worried that this one got forgotten.
George Clooney's in it, Woody Harrelson, Nick Nolte, John Travolta, Jim Caviezel.
It's an art movie. It's really kind of all over the map and just showing a bunch of images from World War II. It's different. It's totally different, and props to people for doing that. Wasn't it Harmony Korine or whatever, the guy who did Kids and Gummo? He wanted to change the format for movie making. This movie also kind of does that. Yeah, Terrence Malick, this is kind of, one of his showpieces anyways. It's an artsy fartsy movie. It was a huge critical success, but it is a trip, and so it makes it into the finals. Next up, from Michael Bay, starring Ben Affleck, Bruce Willis, the movie is Armageddon.
Aerosmith, I don't want to miss a thing. That's what I think about when I think about this movie. I just remember Liv Tyler and Ben Affleck. It was like a lovey movie, but it kept you on the edge of your seat. It was a huge blockbuster movie.
They work on an oil rig, and so they're really good at drilling. And the way to stop this comet from smashing into the earth is to go up and drill a hole into it and drop explosives into the hole. So they got to go out into space with this portable drill rig. It's nuts. Okay. I remember kind of getting sick of this song by the time I watched the movie. And so when it was in the movie, I remember being kind of like, oh, I was just kind of done with this song already. It got played a lot, and I loved Aerosmith. It was a catchy new song. The soundtrack was massive,
And the movie, Liv Tyler, was pretty hot at the time too. And she's in the movie playing Bruce Willis's daughter, who's dating Ben Affleck.
Liv Tyler, Nepo baby number 5.
This was right before she got the role on Lord of the Rings. Final finalist for Raddest Action Sci-Fi Adventure, directed by Rob Bowman, starring David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson. The movie is The X-Files. Fight the Future. Another Ween tie-in. Ween was on the soundtrack for this movie. The song Beacon Light. The B-side of that is also Foo Fighters' Walking After You, which is another great song. Yeah, I absolutely love The X-Files. Watched it a lot. It was filmed in Vancouver, just across the water from us. And so I was pretty stoked when this was coming out. I was pretty excited. I was like, this is going to be cool. They get a big time budget. And it was basically like a long episode of The X-Files. Like there was a bit more budget and it was a bit bigger and stuff like that. It was cool. I'd still watch it to this day for sure. And the winner of Raddest Action Sci-Fi Adventure goes to Ronin, directed by John Frankenheimer. Second place, runner-up for Raddest Action Adventure Sci-Fi of 1998 goes to Saving Private Ryan, directed by Steven Spielberg. Next category is Raddest Action Sci-Fi Adventure, 1999. The honorable mention for this one didn't quite make the finalists was Mystery Men. We have 6 finalists for Raddest Action Sci-Fi Adventure. The first one is directed by Troy Duffy, starring Willem Dafoe, Sean Patrick Flannery, Boondock Saints.
It was kind of one of those like cult that everybody's like, have you seen the Boondock Saints? It was kind of like Donnie Darko. If you remember, Donnie Darko was like, have you seen Donnie Darko? Boondock Saints is one of those movies. One of the main guys, I think Norman Reedus, he ended up getting big off of Walking Dead, of playing Daryl on The Walking Dead. Yeah, it's a great movie from what I remember. I have to go back and rewatch it.
So anyways, Boondock Saints is a cool movie. Yes, like Jesse said, cult classic. At the time, like an instant kind of cult classic. Like, yeah, exactly what Jesse said. I can't add anything to that. Next up, Idle Hands. Once again, we already talked about this one, directed by Rodman Flender. After that, a Raddest Action Sci-Fi Adventure. We come to a big one, directed by the Wachowskis, Lana and Lily, starring Lawrence Fishburne and Keanu Reeves, Matrix.
Say what you want about the sequel and the third movie, but the first movie was, like a Pulp Fiction or that really changed movies. But it did. It changed everything. Unique film, the slow motion and the dodging the bullets. And
first movie I ever saw somebody put a DVD into a DVD player and show me the difference between the VHS and the DVD was The Matrix. I can't remember whether I saw it in the theater or not. I feel like I did. It was a big deal pretty much right away. I remember so well going and seeing the second one, which was one of the biggest disappointments I've ever went and seen in the theater. This movie was so good. The problem with the second and the third one is the plot. They came up with a really ingenious idea around this plot. It had never been done before. The special effects were also groundbreaking for sure.
Hugo Weaving too is so good in that film. Agent Smith.
One of the best action movies really in quite a long time. This was a huge deal. Next movie, directed by David Fincher, starring Brad Pitt and Edward Norton.
Helena Bonham Carter.
And her. We're looking at Fight Club.
It's one of the best. It's one of the best movies. And it wasn't super big when it came out. Similar to Man on the Moon, had no Oscar nominations, nothing. Man, Edward Norton just doesn't get his dues as well, too. Like, he was robbed in American History X. He was robbed in Primal Fear. And he probably should have been at least nominated in Fight Club. He's so goddamn good. And obviously, Brad Pitt is good in this film as well, too. But there's so many Meatloaf, there's so many great other bits in this film. And the first time I saw it, it was so, above me. I didn't get it fully. And so when you watch it again and again and again, it means more to you upon new viewings. But what a fucking film Fight Club is.
So the first time I watched it, I didn't like it. We went to go see it in the theater, the same theater as Blair Witch and the other one. My buddy Tristan, who's been on the panel before here, locked his keys in the car when we got there. And so the whole time it was like, shit, we got to break into his car when we leave. And that kept weighing on me in the back of my mind. I was super anxious about his keys being locked in the car the whole show. And sometimes when you go to the theater, if you're in a wrong headspace, it can screw a movie up. And this is a prime example of that. Became a big David Fincher fan. And this movie grew on me over the years. Brad Pitt and Ed Norton. And Ed Norton was in just a string of really amazing movies in the 90s, especially.
I read a really interesting article. I can't remember if it was an interview I watched or an article I watched about Ed Norton. And he's very selective about what he does now. He's still making films. He does a lot of like Wes Anderson stuff. And he's like, why do you think I do a lot of Wes Anderson films? He's like, I don't make anything from Wes Anderson films. Like Wes Anderson films always have all these incredible actors and they're not making much, right? Because they're making scale or whatever. He's like, in order to do, that's why you see me in like a fucking diamond commercial or some shit, because I need to make some money so I can go do the fucking Wes Anderson movie, So I saw that and I love that. I was like, that makes sense. You got to pay the bills, but at the same time, that gets you into the Wes Anderson film. So he's still around. He's still doing his thing. On Fincher, interesting that you brought that up too, because I liked Fight Club when I first saw it, but I didn't really sit on it for a while. And I'm a big fan of The Game, which you talked about recently on the 1997 Rad Flicks. The Game is such a good film. Incredible twist at the end as well too. Obviously Seven, another incredible film. And so it was Fincher and my love for Fincher movies that got me back to rewatch Fight Club and appreciate it for what it is.
The Game for me was really, closed me in on David Fincher for sure. Up next, finalist 1999, directed by David Cronenberg. The movie is Existence, starring Jennifer Jason Leigh and Jude Law. 1999 as well. The Mummy. The Mummy is another the last finalist is The Mummy, starring Brendan Fraser. The winner is The Matrix, raddest action sci-fi adventure of the year. Absolutely. Second place goes to David Fincher's Fight Club. Third place goes to Boondock Saints. That's a wrap on Rad Flicks 1999, and the 90s are over. I'm going to do a couple round up 80s and 90s episodes. I'm going to jump into the 2000s. I want to say thank you to the Normal People panel, especially Jesse for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I love talking movies. We don't get to do this. Let's talk movies more. Except for 2000. Terrible year in movies.
A reminder to like, comment, subscribe, all that shit below. Share it. Let us know what your picks would be in each category. I'm sorry, I'm a little low on facts and high on opinions.